Join the conversation.
You're with CapeTalk.
It is 10:37, and Daniel Den Hollander, psychologist, joins us. We're having a conversation about a difficult conversation, which in itself is a difficult conversation, is it not?
Absolutely, I would agree. So, I think a lot of the time when we come into a conversation, we don't come into a conversation neutral. We come with histories, we come with mindsets, we come with worldviews, and those in themselves. We might have a different worldview or a different perspective from the person next to us. We might not fully even understand that person. And that often is the root at which conversations become difficult, because they tend to then become insensitive.
And I guess the reason for that is because we go into these difficult conversations with a predestined outcome, with our own views that we're going to look to sell to the next person. But that's not the way to enter it, is it? We should go in there to listen and learn and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also just thinking, it's also that thing of calling into a radio station is you want to give the world a piece of your opinion. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But what I do notice in especially in today's world is that we become prescriptive rather than descriptive, and we feel like we have to teach somebody something before we become curious ourselves. I think those two WhatsApp calls that you got are a pretty good example of that. And the one person is very concentrated about sort of solution focused. How do we get a meal on the table with limited amount of funds, and has a quick solution in regards to the situation. But in their mind, the situation is just to have a meal on your table and find a way of deviating from the price of chicken that will go up. The other person who calls immediately afterwards has a different perspective, because that person is able to take a step back and understand the deeper, darker difficulties with the whole issue at hand, and realizes is that this has got to do with the earth. This has got to do with collective living. This has got to do with collective living with the environment, and has a different response. And it's exactly that kind of thinking that we're missing, is that we tend to live very much in the immediacy of a situation and want to come up with solutions that actually provide more problems, because we're not willing to be curious about all the dynamics and all the history and all the worldviews and the person that we're speaking to.
I want to find out from you. I'm talking to Daniel Den Hollander, a psychologist. Why having the difficult conversations is so hard. Maybe you want to join in and help us with our thinking. You're welcome via WhatsApp at 072-567-1567. You can also call on 021-446-0567. Should we even have these tough conversations, these courageous conversations? I think they're so very necessary. There are Gen Zs. They have such an innate sense of fair play. They're like, don't bring your dharma, don't bring your ideological disposition or your religious disposition to the table. This is just unfair. They have a sense of fair play. Maybe there's a little there with millennials. Can we rely on them to rewrite, just the values that govern society today?
Not in isolation. We need to be in balance. I think youth brings vibrance, youth brings new ideas, youth brings change and revolution. But youth is like a young tree. When a major big storm comes over, if their roots are not in place, they're going to blow over. And
you're going to be cancelled, psychologist.
That's okay. It's a risk to take. But I think it's the combination of the two. Is we need youth and wisdom, because the older generation brings history, brings wisdom. I find it so useful when I myself put my foot in my mouth, just have a colleague who's a bit older than me take me to the side and explain it to me with the wisdom that they have and the history that comes with that. I've experienced that a lot this week. I was at the CISA Congress this week in Johannesburg, but I experienced a lot of that, of people who have been there, who, their lived experience was the really difficult, dark days that we don't want to talk about, as your one caller made reference to. You get a lot of wisdom, and that wisdom starts to build into the roots. And those roots need to be developed. You talk about a tree, what you see outside. We know that the tree formation is as deep underneath the tree as it is above the tree. And that takes time to build, and you cannot have one without the other. But if we leave it all to the old folk, then we're also in trouble, because then we're not going to go anywhere. It'll be like a car with two brake pedals.
Exactly. And again, it brings us to the other word called values. And maybe the older folks think that they are, they've been nominated to be the champions of this word, values. And maybe the values don't apply anymore. Maybe the values itself need to be looked at critically.
Agreed. And I mean, there's a quote from Biko that states that when we look at culture, that culture is every generation's ability at trying to solve the varied problems of our current lives. So for Biko's understanding of culture was the idea that it has to be fluid and it has to be renegotiated in the present, in the here and now. And anything that we add, as long as we keep the human being at the center, is culture. And I think, I mean, right here is exactly where the difficult conversation comes in, right? Because we just came from, and 30 years is really nothing. That's, I don't know why we think 30 years is a long time. 30 years.
It's enough time. It's enough time to decide the politics aren't serving you.
I would agree there. It's enough time to make changes. It's enough time to dawn in a new generation or a new way of living. But I would say that if we're talking about psychological damage, no, 30 years is still a very short period of time. If we're talking about generations, it doesn't even encompass one generation, really. So from a psychological growth perspective, no, but from a living perspective, yes. There's enough that you can do in 30 years.
But let's look at values. So we're a constitutional democracy, so all our hopes and dreams and aspirations are vested in a document called the Constitution. Then we have poverty and hunger in this particular place. And if the Constitution is the cause of poverty and hunger, then surely the Constitution must be on the table as well when you discuss solutions for such problems.
But this is one of the strange things about South Africa, is our policies and documents are some of the best in the world. We have a reputation of having brilliant documents. That's never been the issue. The issue has been the implementation thereof. We're not implementing what we've got. If the Constitution was implemented in the way that it was written, we would be actually in a really good space. But that's exactly what is not happening. And what I'm noticing is that what we're doing at this point in time, let me explain it like this. So we know with the human mind that there's two parts to our brain, if you like. There's the impulsive part and the rational part. We know that the impulsive part, if you like, develops earlier than the rational parts. We as human beings, we spend an extreme amount of time developing. So, for example, Springbok within about a few hours is running around and doing its thing. We take 21 years to fully develop our brains.
Still.
Some of us are still developing. But now, in those 21 years, what is it that's developing is our ability to rationalize and our higher cognitive functioning skills, our ability to be able to have a relationship with each other. Now, if our impulsive brain responds and it works better than our rational brain, then our rational brain is constantly catching up. And we see that a little bit because if we are dealing with something like greed is very much an impulsive thing. It's I want, it's mine, I'm taking it. And then the rational brain is catching up. And I wonder to an extent, we always have this issue where we have very smart people who do very terrible things and then have amazing ways of talking and sound very, very smart but never actually say anything and just basically tire us out. That to an extent, I mean, that's where the initial problem is that we're not being honest. We're not being truthful. We're talking a lot, having something to say in a very charming way. And our children are lapping this up, and they're starting to do it themselves. And so, on the one hand, and the other hand, have had enough and said to us, stop with your nonsense, stop with your politics, stop with your conversations. We've had enough. We want to have some control over it.
I think the question is, are there any holy cows? Are something sacrosanct? Is that Constitution sacrosanct? Just as an example of a difficult conversation. And Daniel Den Hollander, my guest psychologist, we're talking about how to have difficult conversations.
It's a loaded question. That's the best way to say it. I think personally, I really believe that we should be able to have every single conversation. But for us to have every single conversation, we risk two things. We risk our own reputation and we risk anger. And I think anger is something that we really battle with. But anger is a necessary part of healing. You cannot heal, especially in South Africa, around conversations around race and culture, which are so much more necessary to have than we even realize. We taboo it. The Durban July uprising is a good example of just how much is not known and not understood and tabooed. And we don't have those conversations, and because we're scared of each other's anger, because our anger is deafening and is dangerous. But if we don't have anger, we can't get to healing.
So revolution or some kind of progressive move in that direction, I'd prefer to have it through courageous conversations. But I wanted to ask you about the higher cognitive brain that you talk about. Is that something different to a higher kind of consciousness?
I think it's about understanding how socializing takes place with human beings. There's an important component about humans. We're different than any other mammal on this planet because we can create societies and communities much bigger than any other animal. In fact, the only mammals that match us on size and population are ones that we literally cultivate to eat, like cattle and chicken. How do we get this right? Because of our ability to be able to socialize with each other. Look at us. We don't have long nails. We don't really have strong nails. Our skin is very weak.
Speak for yourself.
If we sit on an elephant, the elephant won't notice, but if an elephant sits on us, we're going to ER. There's very little about a human being that allows us to defend against the elements, and yet we're on the top, second on top of the food chain. I think the viruses have beaten us now. So second on the food chain. And as a result of that, how did we manage to do so? And we did that through our ability of creating relationships. And all of that higher cognitive skills that we're talking about is about being able to develop communities with each other, and through the communities use that as our protective factor. So you talk about a spider spins a web, a beaver makes a dam. Human beings, we make societies and communities.
Yeah. I got you. So you're saying there's a difference there. So then you would concede to the word spirituality as well.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, cool.
I'm African.
Yeah. Let's go to let's practicalize, because we were using hypothetical examples like the Constitution, and that's obviously going to elicit lots of debate. But is it sacrosanct, really? Is it even relevant if people are dying of hunger? The question that I put to Daniel. Hi, Daniel. This is a practical need. Firstly, I always appreciate your views and insight into psychology. It's always great having you on CapeTalk. I would like to know, when speaking about it, I'll repeat that. I would like to know, when speaking about difficult conversations, is writing an email to someone a no-no? Is there some hard rule that dictates it always has to occur face-to-face? I struggle to speak face-to-face, as I don't want to end up saying something in the moment that I can't take back. Black man, you're on your own.
I don't think I've earned that right yet. By getting there, hopefully. Okay, just to answer that question, look, I think we all have our different ways of engaging. I think in a question like that, if you're sitting with, is an email or is a WhatsApp message, I think the important question is, why would you want to do it in email and not face to face? What is it that you are worried about and scared about? If it's about not wanting to confront what it is that you've done, let's say, for example, it's something like an apology or something along those lines, YB Long, a really brilliant psychologist in Rondebosch said, if you feel guilty about something, the cure to guilt is acknowledgement plus atonement. So then I would say you do need to have a face-to-face in regards to that. However, sometimes with some of us, there's reasons, there could be other reasons as to why we would not want to have a face-to-face. Maybe it's an insensitive space to be in. Maybe it might feel that if I crouch there with my physicality, then I'm impeding into somebody else's space. I think that's a lot more sensitive, and sometimes it is useful to be able to put something like that into place to protect the space. But I think also there's nothing wrong with preparing something in writing if you're worried about saying it the wrong way, and literally reading it out in front of somebody. I've had that happen to me a few times, and it's actually quite an important, beautiful thing of having someone write something down, read it out in front of me, and then give me the letter afterwards. But I suppose that talks about the face-to-face. So I think it's, what are the reasons behind why you want to do one avenue of contact rather than another? And if it tends to be avoidance, I would avoiding at all costs, because it loses something of the spirituality and also loses something of the ability of that person being able to respond to you, which is often where the healing in that relationship can take place.
But if you're going to have a brave conversation, if you're going to have the courageous conversation, then there should be an element of vulnerability that you personally take into that kind of conversation as well. It is a case of, listen, I love you, but I really hate you.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a question, sorry.
Is that the vulnerability you're talking about?
Yes, if you're going to have a courageous conversation, you're going in on equal terms, are you not?
Yeah, I mean, I love you, but I hate you, that in itself is quite an interesting proposition, right? Because what is it about the person that you love and what is it about the person that you hate? Often in those kind of situations, I love the person but hate what they stand for, right?
Exactly.
So in that case, I think it's also, a little bit of people need to be ready to hear the things that they need to be to hear. Let me give you an example. There was a period of time in my life, about 8 years ago now, where I used to have this idea that the color of your skin doesn't matter. And I remember so clearly that I had a very dear friend who took exception to that and wanted to explain it to me. And I remember that he loves me like a brother, but he hated what I had to say. And the approach that he took to me was, he first came and found me. I don't know how he had this amount of patience. And then over a series of 2 or 3 evenings, had deep conversations with me. I fought with him twice. The third time I understood what he had to say. And I think to an extent is to say, I had to come to him, even though he had the difficult thing to say to me. So I also want to say, it's a two-way passage. It's a two-way journey. If somebody's, you can say to them, I have a problem with what you have to say. You don't have to hold that space for them. They need to hold that space for themselves. And when they're willing to get curious and get out of their prescriptive and into the curious mode, then growth is available for them. But you don't have to hold their growth in your hands. That's their responsibility, not yours. And if that means that you don't speak to each other for a little while or keep your conversations limited, by the grace of my brother, he was patient enough to let me learn that lesson. But I don't think it's your responsibility. It wasn't his responsibility for me to learn that lesson.
Morning, Clarence. I'm so grateful for the wisdom of the psychologist you're speaking to. Balance is so important in everything. It's always a matter of one or the other. We're missing the word and, me and you, this and that. Yes. Is there a balance between seeing someone else's perspective and not giving away your power? That's what we're seeking, Desiree. Such a wise person. I'm loving this conversation, says somebody else. We need to have courage for these conversations, and it's not courage if it isn't scary. Yes, indeed. We need authenticity and vulnerability. This is our ability to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Barbara, I love you. With compassion and curiosity, she continues, these are superpowers. Hate you is too strong a word. I'd rather say, I love you, but don't like you at this moment. We're going to have to wrap it there. And hopefully this is the first of many conversations that's going to help us to grow in terms of ourselves and each other. And I think that's really the opportunity that we seek through Daniel Den Hollander, who's a wise psychologist, but he also brings another generational perspective to the equations. And sometimes he just turns things on its head, which is, I think, what we need in this country. Thank you, Daniel. It's appreciated.